To exercise every day, finish a project around the house, or complete a college degree, you need a healthy dose of motivation. That same thing is true for forgiveness. So what should motivate you to forgive? Find out next on Grace to You. You've no doubt heard that one key to the learning process, probably the greatest key regardless of the subject, is to ask questions. And often the simple question like what, how, and why yield the most useful information. So John Macarthur is studying the topic of forgiveness, and we've seen the what and how of forgiveness. And today on Grace to You, John will get into the why of forgiveness. After the message, John will discuss his booklet answering the hard questions about forgiveness. To find out how you can get a copy of that, call 1-800-55-GRACE or visit gty.org. Right now, turn to the book of Philemon as John Macarthur begins today's lesson.
Forgiveness is a promise. That's really what it is. It's a promise. It's a promise never to take revenge. It is the opposite of a refusal to forgive, which is a promise to seek revenge. If you want a simple definition then of forgiveness, think of it as a promise never to take revenge. It is a verbally declared promise. It is a statement of love that affirms, I hold no anger, I hold no hatred, I hold no bitterness against you. And it has a threefold perspective. I won't ever bring it up to you. I won't ever bring it up to anybody else. I won't ever bring it up to myself. That's forgiveness. No matter what you have done to me, no matter how you have offended me, I make a promise never to seek revenge. I hold no anger. I hold no hatred. I hold no bitterness. I won't ever bring it up to you. I won't ever bring it up to anybody else. And I won't ever bring it up to me. That's forgiveness. Forgiveness, we have noted, is the most godlike and the most Christ-like act a Christian can do. Never are you more like God or Christ than when you forgive. Because that is what God does. That is what Christ does. Forgiveness is a magnificent virtue. Now, this wonderful little letter, without ever mentioning the word forgiveness, teaches us a living lesson in forgiveness. It teaches us some very essential elements of forgiveness in most gentle, most practical, and most subtle ways. Paul has already helped us to see and identify the kind of character one has to have to forgive. In verses 4 through 7, we indicated that if you are going to have the character of one who forgives, you will have a concern for the Lord, a concern for people, a concern for fellowship, a concern for knowledge, a concern for Christ's glory, and a concern for service. And all of that comes out of verses 4 to 7. Then, Paul also made us very aware not only of the character of one who forgives, but of the action of one who forgives. And we noted that there are three elements to that action. There is reception, then restoration, and then restitution. That's in verses 8 through 18. And then we come now to the final verses of this letter, verses 19 through 25. And Paul opens to us insight into the motives for forgiveness. Why forgive? What is the compelling, driving, internal motivation? Now, again, I remind you that all of these features that we've been looking at are subtle in this letter, but they are present. And they do give us a full description of one who forgives. What motivates someone to forgive? Certainly forgiveness is bold. Certainly forgiveness is brave. Certainly forgiveness is heroic. But at the same time, it should be normal for a humble Christian. So it is on the note of motives that Paul closes the letter with some gracious but pregnant words meant to excite the heart of Philemon to forgive Onesimus. And each one of his final remarks in those remaining verses carries in it the embryo of a truth that acts as motivation for us to forgive as well. What then motivates a person to forgive? Number one, the recognition that I owe a debt I can't pay. The recognition that I owe a debt I can't pay. Notice verse 19. I, Paul, am writing this with my own hand. I will repay it. Stop at that point for a moment. This is quite an interesting note. Paul's custom was to dictate his letters to an amanuensis or a secretary, somebody who wrote them down. But it was also Paul's custom at the end of many of his letters to pick up the quill and to sign his own name. For example, at the end of the letter to the Colossians, which would have been delivered at the same time Philemon was being delivered, you'll notice in chapter 4, verse 18, that epistle closes with this, I, Paul, write this greeting with my own hand. Remember my imprisonment, grace be with you. Not unlike what you might do today, were you to dictate a letter and have your secretary write it all down and then sign your name and add a P.S. in your own hand. It was common for the Apostle Paul to pick up the pen and write something with his own hand. Now, you will notice that he has said something very significant in verse 18. He said, if Onesimus has wronged you in any way or owes you anything, charge that to my account. This is the issue of restitution. Paul knows Onesimus has nothing. He can't repay what he stole. He can't repay the 500 denarii that Philemon had to spend to get someone to take Onesimus' place. He doesn't have that money. So Paul says, instead of trying to get it out of him, he doesn't have it, just charge it to my account. And then most interestingly, Paul says, I, Paul, am writing this with my own hand, I will repay it. And Paul picks up the pen and signs the IOU with his own name. That's what he's doing. I'm writing my own name with my own hand as a guarantee that if you'll put it on my account, I'll pay it. And he keeps the pen in hand from verse 19 to the end.